Sudburys of the Comox First Nation. We would like to thank them for the privilege of living on their land and the gift of working with their children. I'm going to maybe ask Trustee Leslie if she can make a motion to appoint our acting secretary treasurer for the night. Would that be okay?
Excellent. That the Board of Education of School District number 71, Comox Valley, appoint Associate Superintendent Joe Heslip to the role of acting secretary treasurer, in addition to his role as Associate Superintendent for the open committee of the whole meeting held April 8th, 2025.
You, seconded by Christy May Sack.
All in
All in
favor?
favor? And next is the adoption of our agenda. May I get a motion to adopt the agenda?
Chelsea, the Board of Education of School District number 71, Comox Valley approved the April 8th, 2025 Open Committee of the Whole agenda as amended.
Seconded by Christy May.
Aye.
All in favor? Thank you. So yeah, I'd like to welcome our presenters tonight. Sean Lamoureux, Associate Superintendent, Casey Peterson, District Principal of Inclusive Ed, and Tara Ryan, District Vice Principal of Inclusive Education. They have a presentation that I'm excited to sit through tonight called Inclusive Education 101.
Thank you, Vice Chair Howe. Every year we get asked to present to the university graduates, and usually we start our discussion with there's not a better job in education to have than working in inclusive ed. And part of that is because we get to think creatively, get to think outside the box, but more importantly, we get to ensure that all of our students have success by being able to take all our resources collectively to support them. For those who aren't aware, we have quite a complex department. We're involved in all schools in the district as a whole, but as an example, we have over 300 staff, either directly or indirectly, that we work with. We're fortunate because Tara Ryan, excuse me, I'm losing my voice, so I'm doing my best I can. Tara Ryan and Casey Peterson lead our department, and today they're going to do just a broad overview of inclusive education. But at any time, if there's a subject that you want further information on, we're quite willing to come back and be able to do that. We're doing it already with the DPAC, but we can do it with any group as well. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Tracy and Tara.
Sean.
Thank you. We're just having a little bit of technical problems here.
Thanks, Michelle.
I just swap out our laptop. No, I don't think so. I think we need to just take it out of presenter view. Josh is nodding. Go into regular view.
Yeah, sure. While you guys are setting up, Sean, or any of you, is there a method that you'd like to receive questions tonight as you're going through the presentation, or would you prefer a few questions at the end?
You know, it's kind of a free-flowing presentation back and forth.
Great.
And so if we're talking, it fits within what we're doing, feel free to ask. We'll do the best we can to answer. If it's something that's much more complex, then, you know, we can maybe address it at the end. But yeah, feel free to ask as we're working through it.
Great. So just let me know if you have any questions, and I can make up a little queue for everyone.
We've got a recast. But you'll have yours. Okay.
We're almost there.
We're almost there.
Okay, today felt like a little bit of a Monday for me today. I was having some technical problems at work as well.
Don't feel bad. 2 years ago, MIT had a presentation on technology, and they could not get their point.
Yay. That's hilarious.
We are close. I first just want to express my appreciation, as always, to be living and working and learning and playing on this beautiful territory of the Comox First Nation. I am a guest here. My name is Tracy Peterson, as Sean let you know, and my father's family is from Norway. My mother's family was from England, but I was lucky enough to have had the Comox Valley in my life all the time, for all my life. I didn't grow up here. My parents both grew up in the Comox Valley. I grew up on the Vancouver Island's west coast, on the traditional territory of the New Channels people. And I grew up there and I started my career there. So I spent my first 10 years of teaching in the village of Savalas. And I think that that's actually what led me to develop this passion for inclusive education. So I was, I believe, fortunate enough to live in a community where the resources were slim, and that as a classroom teacher, I had to really work hard to ensure that all the needs of my learners were being met. And that meant meeting those children where they are, and celebrating those diversities that I was able to see. So I started teaching in Savalas. I came to Comox Valley in 2004, and I've held a variety of positions in this time, or during that time, mostly in inclusive ed, but not exclusively in inclusive ed, until now, where I am the district principal. So yeah, that's me.
And thank you for inviting us back, or inviting me back, and having our team here to present. I think most of you have met me before when I was here doing a presentation on a couple of other things, but a small bit of my history. I grew up in Saskatchewan. I received my undergrad degree there, and my first teaching job was in Clinton, BC. So much like Tracy, had the time I wasn't sure it was a privilege, but looking back, I realized those first 3 years of my career were such a steep learning curve. And in a small community, I got the chance to do just about every job that was available in a school because there's so few of us there. So my path was a bit different than Tracy's in that I went, after several years of teaching, into counseling, and I accessed inclusive ed that way, and has really developed a heart for kids who need extra support, whether that's academically, emotionally, socially, and landed with this team, which I'm really fortunate to be a part of, and have learned a lot in the last 2 years with them as well. So I'm still learning, but Inclusive Ed 101 is some of the things that I've learned over the last couple of years. So we're happy to be here and share that with you.
Thanks, Tara. And that is one thing I didn't say, and I know I'll probably say it at the end too, but we really appreciate this opportunity to be here tonight. I think it's really great. I love talking about this stuff. The work we do is, I believe, is heart work. It's really about the child, but we are also guided by Canadian law and, of course, the Ministry of Education and Childcare policy and legislation. We are also guided by, what's actually been a long-awaited, updated inclusive education manual. It's been a long time coming. It was something that people in inclusive education have been waiting for a number of years. And in the fall of 2024, they just announced, or just released the new manual that helps guide our work. We are also guided by our district policies and our administrative procedures. The wonderful new resources that the Trustee Association of BC has just put out that has some really great guiding principles and things to think about moving forward. And of course, our own strategic plan.
So speaking of strategic plan, we've been doing quite a deep dive with several of our departments, like with our learning support teachers, inclusive ed as a whole, our counselors, and even our youth and family workers into this particular part of the strategic plan. Looking at different themes that are emerging, certainly around compassion, inclusion, and belonging in our school district. And it's great that our team has really dived into it, and we're trying to link meaning from that into the work that we do daily. Oh, sorry. There we go. We're working out 2 computers here. So what does this actually mean in our schools? It really is about hard work and coming back to what does everybody need, and having that starting with belonging. Belonging is such a key word that we've been working on lately. And how do we make our students feel like they belong despite any kind of diversities or extra support that they need. It does become a little bit complex when we're breaking it down and talking about it with families. We get into all of these ideas around designated kids versus non-designated kids and who gets support and how does that get doled out between our students at school. As we know, all systems have a finite amount of resources. And so I think we've been evolving with that idea of belonging at our forefront and keeping the child in the center.
Sure. So Tara just mentioned designations. We currently have just over 1,200 designated students in the Comox Valley. This includes about 670 low incidence or funded students with designations. However, the supports that we offer and we provide and that we have a responsibility to ensure are in our schools are not limited to these students. We don't limit our supports to the students that have designations in the district. We have certain ministry criteria that we follow to ensure the designations happen and are appropriate, but we also recognize that not all students will meet that ministry criteria, and they will still and may still be vulnerable in one area or another, and that we have a responsibility to support these kids, whether they're designated, funded, or not. We support, and my kind of catchphrase that I often say, and I find myself saying it more than I wish I had to still, is that we support students, we don't support designations, right? We support our learners, we support our children, regardless of the diagnosis or lack of diagnosis. We're finding that students are getting diagnosed a little bit later than they typically would have because of a number of factors, but again, meeting the learner where they're at is paramount.
I think I'll just add to that briefly. This is my 34th year in education, and when I first learned about designations coming to British Columbia, it was very much those top 3 levels around low incidence, from physically dependent down to intensive behavior that you see on this chart. The mandate, certainly in the other district that I started working in, was those are the kids that get support. And it's not okay if you're pulling EAs from those kids to help support the other designated categories. And so I knew what you were going to say as soon as you said what your mantra is, because I've heard Tracy say it so many times, is we support students, we don't support designations. The funding comes from the designations for sure, but we're here to support all students and their needs.
That being said, I just have to add again to this a little bit, sorry, is that we do have a responsibility to ensure supports are there for those designations too. Otherwise, we would not be in compliance with ministry education expectations. So we're not supporting, but we're making sure that we're looking at, we're keeping the child at the center of our decision making.
Just had a quick question here.
Yeah, just curious about that. Can you explain what that looks like in the schools and how that's communicated to schools? Just because from personal experience and a lot of anecdotal evidence from teachers was that they have students in the classroom who have designations such as K designation or Q, most likely a Q, struggling to get support that's needed in the classroom, and the responses or what they're being told or the families are being told and the classroom teacher is that that student doesn't get support, doesn't qualify for support. So how does that messaging get passed on to schools, and how is it considered at the school level or at your level?
I think in a variety of ways, certainly through some of these conversations and through our expectations around school-based team, which we'll talk a little bit about later. We can certainly talk about that, is, schools are allocated a certain amount of resources. Resources are finite, like we don't have an overflowing, we'd like to say we have an overflowing bucket, but it's not a bottomless bucket. So resources are allocated, and then schools make hard decisions about where those resources are allocated. But no decision should be based, as far as I'm concerned, and certainly that would be something that we as a department, as department leads or inclusive education leaders would be talking to schools about, that the decisions we make are centered around the child, not around a diagnosis or a designation. So really needs-based model rather than any other. And maybe we could.
And I'll just very
Yeah.
quickly add to that. I think it's really easy to jump to support equals EA. And that's one of the things we've really been trying to talk with our teams a lot about lately is support isn't just having another EA in the classroom. It's about having our specialist inclusion teachers, which we'll talk about in a bit, coming in and helping with programming so that it's more appropriate to the child's level. It's using our OTs and our SLPs and our counselors and our whole team, which we'll go over again in a little bit. So I just want to caution, as we do all the time, not to equate support with another body in the classroom, rather a lot of the background work that's done to support those students as well. We're a big team, as you'll see shortly.
Yeah, nice point, Tara. And there was one other thing that it'll come back to me, I'm sure. Oh, so, sorry. Yes, and so
Sorry, backwards. There we go.
Okay, so keeping the child at the center, and one of the things that we need to remember is just like it's not just about the EA, it's not just about the school too, right? We work very closely with school supports, with district supports, with family, and even community. There are many kids that require us to be thinking about all of those levels of supports. So, oh, I remember what I was going to say. And if we're talking about the school level, we have school-based supports, but we also have education has changed in the last few years, and not everybody has all the actual knowledge of some of the things that we can do for kids to support them in the classroom that we were not able to do a number of years ago. The accessibility features of technology, things like that, we're just come so far in our ability to support in a universally designed way. We have classrooms where we can meet the needs of the kids with some of the structures and what we know pedagogically is right about teaching children. Our redesigned curriculum in BC allows for us to better meet the child where they're at. We don't have to rely on that EA or pull the kid out of the classroom now to ensure they're getting what they need. But again, we cannot support this child in isolation. We need to be thinking about everybody involved and everybody who can help support. We need to work together.
So we do have, as I mentioned, a pretty big team. We do have over, and I have to reference the numbers here. I don't have them memorized. We do have over 300 staff in our department, or staff that we oversee in our department. We've got over 200 EAs working throughout our schools in the district, elementary to high school, K to 12. We have approximately 40 learning support teachers divided between our schools that are school-based. We have approximately 30 counselors, and I believe we are still staffed in counselors among one of the highest staffings in the province. We do have a counselor at least half-time at every single school. The islands are smaller, but every other school is at least staffs a half-time counselor. And we currently have 12 youth and family program workers working throughout our schools.
Yep, go ahead. And then, was it you, Shannon, after?
You say the staffing is higher than elsewhere. Do you mean in terms of that there's counselors in schools, or do you mean the number of counselors to students? Because my understanding is that we are right at the required level that is the same throughout the province.
Do you want to address?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's being addressed is that we're one of the only districts that I'm aware of that has a counselor embedded into every high school, where most districts have pods. So for instance, 73 as an example, will have 6 pods of counselors that are responsible for 6 or 7 schools. So we actually have FTE embedded into every school that exists. And then we have flexibility within our counselors. So if we have a half-time counselor at airport, as an example, something happens on a different day that they need to be there to support, they have the ability to flex their days between airport and the other school they're at to be able to support the need at the school at that time. So that's what, so Tara's getting that.
But the actual numbers would equate because of,
Our numbers, from my understanding, are higher than other districts at our meetings at BCKs.
Go ahead, Chelsea.
I was just curious if you knew off the top of your head, don't worry if not, what the FTE is for the islands at this point for council. What FTE there are for council on the islands right now. I'm sure it's shared
Each island
between.
has 0.1.
0.1.
So we have a counselor going over to the islands 1 day a week. And the counselor that was there earlier this year is on leave. She was alternating. So 1 week she'd go to Hornby, the next week she'd go to Denman. She's on a leave right now, and her replacement is, she was sharing her days, half and half. So we'll do the morning at Denman and the afternoon at Hornby, or vice versa. And now her replacement is doing one island 1 week and the other island the next week. However, as Sean mentioned, there's lots of flexibility in that. If she does need to go to Hornby on her Denman week because there's need there, then she's absolutely welcome to work that out with the schools and be flexible.
Thank you. I was wondering, so 1 day per week, is that pretty average, or is that pretty average for our district for elementary schools then? Or what, just wondering in comparison for the islands like Miracle Beach, how many, what have we got for counselors heading up that way? And for just wondering the equity piece for all of our schools.
Based on population, typically is the FTE
It's based on population and on need. And so Miracle Beach, for example, would be 0.5 comparative to the islands. So we look at that. We also factor in need every year, and have a good look at that when we're doing how much time each school receives.
Megan?
I may not get the wording right, so feel free to correct me, but sometimes when we're looking at FTE positions and positions allocating across the many schools that we have, it can appear from the outside as though all of these positions have somebody. But I'm curious what is actual, like, what are you seeing could you give a ballpark figure for because sometimes staff are away on maternity or on various types of leave. I'm curious would you say you're at 75% of your positions, or?
Like being filled currently?
Counseling?
Yeah.
100.
The
There's
counselor
there's
is
not,
100.
and we had 2 positions, that was a 0.2, and then a leave at Christmas that were filled within 3 weeks.
Could you, jumping ahead a little bit, but SLPs?
We are short SLP right now. We have a current posting, so we're short, but we had a couple of we had a resignation, and it was a bit of a loss for our district, but she moved into a provincial outreach program, so it's great for the province, and is an amazing person, but it did leave us with a bit of a shortage, but we had some other SLPs who were on working part-time who actually said, you know what, I'll step up. So we had 2 SLPs come and increase their assignment mid-year so that they could step in and fill the gap, which I think speaks volumes for our department, because we really, I think as a whole group, I love the people that we work with, and it's inspiring. They inspire me every day with some of those kinds of decisions, but it has still left us with this small shortage, but yeah.
And we do work to replace. We had one youth and family program worker who took another position in the district. We backfilled her right away from another job. And then we just hired somebody yesterday to fill that position. And we have one other one that's open that we're interviewing for this week. So when there's a gap, we try to fill it quite quickly.
Thank you so much. I think we just had one other question here before we move.
Yeah, I'm curious thank you for being here today. I really appreciate it. My understanding is that at the high school level, a fair amount of the work that the counselors do are with course selection assistance. And I've always wondered what the rationale is for that, given the extensive training and expertise that they have in mental health sphere. And so why, and I know it's not just our district that does that, but I'm curious about what the rationale is for that position taking on that role.
It's actually part of the provincial description for being a counselor. It breaks it down into 3 parts. One's education, which is a lot of your diploma verifications, your course selections, your changing classes with teachers, things like that. The other major component is careers, and that's lining up with courses that kids take, so when they go to post-secondary. And then the third part of that is social emotional development. And so those 3 are actually the kind of chunks of the pie if you go third. And in some districts, even though they're called counselors, they almost pay more as you get older, like the university does as an educational guidance. You're supporting the social emotional, but if it gets into a therapeutic pathway, then you refer that on to something like ICI or the ministry. And that has to do with the amount of impact areas on a child. But they actually balance the 3. The major component of a counselor in high school is ensuring student success.
Thank you very much.
So as Sean just alluded to, all of our schools are staffed. So within school-based supports, we'll just talk about that and then move on to district-based supports. But we do staff all of our schools to support, obviously, the educational, but also personal, social, and emotional development of all of our students. The school-based services that we have in place, and we've already spoken a little bit about them, are listed here. Our school counselors, our LSTs, or learning support teachers, our youth and family program workers, which we don't have at every school. There's 2 schools that share one. Every high school has one. Cumberland and Nalatsi, there it is, and Lake Trail have one, and then not all of our elementary schools have a youth and family program worker. That's something that has been, I think, in about the last 5 years that we've placed youth and family workers at elementary schools. That had happened before in our district. We also have school-based speech and language paths. Our English language learning services are in our elementary schools, ELL teachers, and we have a multicultural support worker that supports many of our families in the district. And then also, as we mentioned, our 200 plus EAs throughout the school district.
We often get phone calls from families wondering, saying, oh, I'm moving into the Valley and my child has support needs. What school has the supports that my child is going to need? And of course, we always want to listen to the story. We want to hear about the child. But I'm always feel very confident to say that our schools are staffed to support your children, and we will ensure that the supports that your child needs are at your school. And we can do that because of how we staff our schools. We recognize that we need to be thinking about different things like the population of the school, but also the other demographics that we have to think about. So all schools, we can say have these supports in place, with the exception of not all have a full-time, the FTE is determined by a number of factors. Okay, I think it's important to know a little bit about how we determine supports, or how we determine how to support a child. We use a collaborative problem-solving model in many different ways through often school-based team to figure out what do we need to do for this child? What supports do we need to put in place? What team do we need to bring together to help this student? Often our district specialists are invited into the school to be part of this team, to be part of this problem-solving process. I don't like to be always calling it a problem-solving process because it makes it sound like I'm talking about a child being a problem, and that's not it at all. It's really about figuring out together collaboratively what we can do to increase supports. We have a number of district-based services, and they're working throughout our schools. We do this through a referral process. Sorry. And just to be, we can be really specific here, Terry, on about what those district supports look like. So these folks are not assigned to schools. Typically, they work as itinerants or out of our inclusive education offices and are accessed through a referral service. Unique to the Comox Valley School District, I have to say, is our assistive tech department. It's something that we should all feel extremely proud of. It's a model for the province, I believe, and how we support our students through assistive technology. So that can be anything from simple reading and writing supports to bigger things like switches or assistive technology for communication. And our inclusive, so what is unique is that most school districts don't have an inclusive ed tech department. They have the beautiful tech department that we have in our district, and sits with Josh. But Josh, his team will work with our team to really come together and ensure that the decisions that they're making are decisions that can be impacting all students, including those students with really diverse capabilities or support needs. The other thing that we have that's unique to our school district is a behavioral consultant, which is a new excluded position in the school district. We've been seeing in the last few years an increasing number of kids with complex needs that we need somebody with some really extensive training. So we have a master's level behavior analyst that can come in and work with school teams. Working with her is a behavior intervention support worker, so she can actually implement some planning that occurs, or implement a plan that the behavioral consultant can draft up.
Stop for a quick questions here. I have Michelle.
I have two. Well, my first is a comment. I really appreciated learning about some of the work that happens in the assistive tech department. I was at one of the schools where the PAC had a presentation. Jane came and did a presentation, and it piqued my curiosity to go in and look at a site and all of the amazing resources that are there for students and families. So I just wanted to acknowledge that it was an amazing opportunity to hear Jane share what we do in our school district. What I was wondering is, after the questions for this slide, if you could go back 2 slides, because I have a question about the cooperative problem-solving model. Once we're finished this slide, if we could just go back, because I think Sean has a question on this slide.
It was about the behavior consultant, that we're kind of seeing a crisis right now in the schools at the level of violence, et cetera. So I'm wondering, how is the behavior consultant used? Like, how are they brought in? At what stage? Kind of tying in part, I guess, to collaboration that Michelle might be asking about, because I'm just unclear on what the role would be with.
Well, certainly when safety is an issue, that we have had to prioritize her support when we're worried about safety of students or staff, then that is certainly becomes her priority work. And she is accessed through, and we're going to talk about that later a little bit. We have a district inclusion support team that she sits on, and people where schools can access support through there. But typically, Tara and I make a decision about and guide her in where we need her to be. So she's brought in at any point in time that we become aware of it. Really.
But I think part of maybe what you're asking, Sean, is her specialty being a master's in, as a behavior consultant, is to be able to go in, look at a situation, do observations of the student, of the staff, what's in place, and be able to work collectively with that team, right? To have a plan to better support that child. So to be able to recognize before an issue becomes an issue, what can actually be put into place in a proactive way so it doesn't escalate into some of the situations that we've seen. And that's what they specialize in.
I would add to that as well, if I may. She can come in and take an objective view. She gathers formal data and then makes her decisions on creating a plan around that data without having, oftentimes, if you're a teacher in EA working with a student who has been aggressive or whose behaviors have escalated, it's hard to have an objective view of what the next best step is. So she can go in and gather objective data and make a formal plan. I just met with her today about a student actually, and she was showing me the steps that she has in place for this student. And then our behavior interventionist goes in and they put that into place together and train the staff that are working with that student.
Can I have a follow-up?
Sure.
So could that be a natural part of after an incident, the employee risk reduction plan and the student behavior plan?
Great question. You're okay. If needed, absolutely. Sometimes when we put an employee risk reduction plan in place and we have a really good look at the behavior support plan, which I might go in or Tracy might have a look at it and make some recommendations, that's actually all that's needed. Sometimes it's a matter of sending one of our district inclusion teachers in to look at the programming that perhaps is frustrating a student because it's too complex. It's over their head, it's not appropriate for their level of learning or their disabilities perhaps. And so one of our inclusion teachers will go in and support with programming, and that might be the answer to settling some of those behaviors. So it really depends on what that student needs, and what Tracy and I often try to do is get a fulsome story and narrative of the student, do a file review, find out what's going on. This child hasn't had these behaviors until this year, what's happening, and then use that problem-solving model to try to break down what's happening and figure out how we can put it back together again in an effective way.
I will add that this position is the first one that exists in the province, and it was approved by BCPC just, I think, 2 months ago or 3 months ago. And it was designed or created through the great work of HR and our finance, because we need to look at things differently and through different lenses to be able to support kids. And to have someone who has just got an expertise that can peel an onion just down to a layer at this level is fantastic to have for our district. Since then, we've had numerous requests for the job description for other districts to be able to look at this through a different lens as well.
So this has only been in place for 2 months?
I think it's been 2 months.
So in this role, she has worked with the district with a different title, generously, but with she's a master's level consultant and was working as in a QP role that we wouldn't have been able to maintain. As she becomes board certified, the behavior intervention support worker would augment her, which is a QP role that works with her. So yeah, as a behavioral consultant.
Thank you so much for the answers. I have a couple more quick questions. One from Jen on the left here.
Yeah, just looking at this slide, you mentioned the referral process. I was hoping you could dive into just what that step-by-step looks like in the referral process.
We actually have a slide on that coming up. So
Okay.
that for a little bit, and we'll absolutely address that.
Ahead of it.
Do you have a question?
I'm gonna wait for your referral process slide for my question, because you might answer it.
Okay.
Here we go. Okay.
Susan.
So trustee Waite will to that slide.
About 6 questions, I'm trying to figure out how to make them in. I'm just wondering, how is the process different, or maybe provided like a generic example of if a, trying to even find the right word, if something's identified with a student, is the process different in like early primary versus like middle school versus high school in how something might be navigated? And is it even different with, Sean, you brought up maybe a negative behavior issue, but if it's a social or a learning issue. So like, what does the thought process, or what does the team go through in terms of like that checklist in is it a parent that if a parent brings forward a concern, or a teacher or somebody in the school has a noticing about a student that, you know, there might be some exploring that needs to happen. Is it different in the kind of supports that might be needed and how it's addressed? And is it also done in a different way depending on the age of the child?
Yes. I will give you more than that, but I will try to talk a little bit to that. And I think what we have to do is go back to first our parents and their understanding of their child and what would be considered concerning behavior, and then the teacher, what would be considered concerning behavior or learning, depending on the developmental stage of the child. So what might be a worry for a child that you see a child with a behavior at 7 might not be a worry, but if the behavior is still occurring at 10, it's now a worry. So we rely on our families who are the experts of the child, and we rely on our educators who have the training to recognize when things become a concern. So yes, we would be doing that differently. School-based team process is pretty standard across the district in elementary with some variations in high school. Right now we have a school-based team working group, a focus group working on standardizing some more of those kinds of things throughout the district, because embedded in this, and we didn't plan on talking about this, is we work with a multi-tiered system of support. So we're looking at sort of those baseline supports and those kids that we can, are doing well just with sort of our regular classroom interventions, and then, going up to a tiered level of support where we're recognizing that we need a greater, more intensive support at a higher level. So yes, it does look a little bit differently, but the process is still the same. A parent or a teacher has a concern, it typically goes to school-based team. You have a team that sits around and goes, you know what, I've got some ideas, make an action plan, put some strategies in place, review, we're still thinking things are going, let's bring in somebody from the district. Sometimes somebody from the district, the extended school-based team, I'll call it, might be a psychologist, might be there right from the start, depending on the nature of the concern.
We also have resources that we utilize in elementary that aren't necessarily there for secondary. So as an example, we have a primary years team, which is Dr. Coxon sitting with the ministry and a select group of inclusive ed. And when certain behaviors are identified in a younger age, she'll actually go in and do a visual look at what's happening to the student, what the scenarios are that are occurring, and then work with the family and with the school and with the ministry to move forward. We also, I think it was 3 months ago, hired our third ICY clinical counselor who specialized just in the primary years, recognizing that the earlier that we can get to providing and identifying and having supports in place, the easier the pathway for schooling is than when you identify it when someone's in grade 9 or 10 or something like that.
Does that help?
You mastered my really complicated question. And I just wanted to, and thank you for the examples of I know that was a simple answer to a very complex, like each scenario is so different, so thank you.
I think the bottom line is we do use the phrase, has the school exhausted its resources? So have you tapped into your school-based counselor before you reach out to a district counselor for sort of a more expertise around the topic that you're struggling with? Or have you tapped into your learning support teacher before you've asked for district-based support? So that's where the intensity of supports and complexity arrows on this slide come into play. So if a parent were to approach us and say, my child needs learning support, but they've never approached the school with that question, we would ask them to start with the school to see if that's something that the school could provide before we got involved.
I feel strongly too that part of the role of our district inclusive team and our supports and services at the district level is about building capacity at the school level too. Our district team is the highly skilled and highly trained and often master's level teachers, and are working and have the most experience with our most complex learners. So we want to be able to meet the child's needs as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So part of their role is to work as consultant and to guide the school team and increase the capacity through that process.
I just have a couple questions from two trustees. I'll start with trustee McConnell-Keen and then trustee Leslie quickly, thanks.
My sort of question is just specific to, for what reasons would or would not the family be involved in a school-based team meeting? And then sort of the other hand of that is, would the families be aware at which time the levels were progressing? If you're free to answer that. I know that not all families are involved. I wasn't involved in my son's, and I was curious to the reasons why. So.
Well, that would make
Anybody?
I'm happy to hear that you were not informed and that you were not given that choice, because that is the expectation that I certainly have of schools, is that first the parent is informed and invited. Sometimes there's a reason why we don't have families at school-based team, but only if the parent wants it. So for instance, a learning support teacher might say, you know what, we're going to meet as a team and we're going to try to come up with some ideas, and then we'll invite you in to talk about it. You as the parent could say, you know what? I want to be at that conversation the whole way through. And that is your prerogative. And certainly, and one of the recommendations that's just come out of the focus group is that on the school-based team form, you used to be just a checkbox as the parent consulted. So I'm actually asking for more details there now. Is the parent consulted? On what date? By how? By whom? And are they invited? So it's really important. The parent is the expert.
Yeah.
Right?
Thank you. I was curious.
Yeah, that's.
All
You know
good.
your child best.
Yeah.
It was a long time ago now, but yeah, it wasn't, and not a big deal. Now I've learned. Now I know that there's
Yeah.
perspective on it. Thanks.
And the second part of your question, yes, you should be informed as the process continues. I will say in high school, school-based teams in elementary school typically spend one meeting on one, maybe two children, and they divide it in half. High school school-based teams work in, I forget what they're called, but in triads. And so a school like Isfeld, for example, will have those different teams in place, and they might clip through 8 kids in one meeting. And if that's the case, they typically wouldn't invite a parent to that meeting. And they'd be doing some reviewing, and they may determine, you know what, we need to spend more time on this one student, so let's set up another meeting, and that would be something that a parent could attend.
We're generating a few more questions here. I just want to have a peek at the slideshow.
Yeah.
Great.
I don't want to hold you up too much. But I'll trustee Leslie and then Brian and Megan.
We're ready for my question because we opened it up. So
Or
I
Sean and
thought,
Megan.
I'm going to just slide right in. Is there a collaborative process for when it comes to Indigenous students in terms of values and cultural safety and worldviews, where your teams in level 1, 2, 3, and 4 have an opportunity to collaborate with Indigenous education and their models in order to provide the best possible support for children. And when I say, is there a collaborative process, I mean, is there a structure that is followed consistently in supporting of the child and family?
In terms of a formal structure, we're working on that. So again, I'll refer to the working group that we have currently going on. That is one consideration that hasn't been formalized in the school-based team or collaborative problem-solving model until now. So we have Indigenous voices at the table, and I'm learning from them about what that could look like and how to best do it. So we have an ISW who's contributing, who actually works at a school she's very involved in school-based team. And it's been great for her to be sharing with the group, as well as Chetty sits at the table. And so we're we're working on it, but there are certain standards of practice that we expect. So for instance, ensuring that if a Indigenous family is being contacted about a possible concern or about a possible school-based team, that we're being mindful of who's connecting with that family member and how they're feeling about the process or understanding the process and how they're invited into the process and where they're invited into. So lots of things to consider, like space.
And if I can add, Susan, we're really learning.
Yeah.
Okay, if I'm being 100% honest, Joe's work, I don't know of a day I don't go and consult Joe on a topic or something. We've recently just redone our suicide protocol based on some Indigenous feedback to make sure that we're doing everything we, in the older days, we default to having an Indigenous support worker part of the process. Now we need to, do more and more. Kevin Cameron trained a series of our staff on VITRA through an Indigenous lens. And so anything we can get, we had Avis O'Brien come and work with our counselors on Indigenous theory. And so anything we can do to learn, we build capacity, we open it up, but we are very much at the learning stage.
Well, that's all really good to hear. And that would be my hope and dream, that those more formalized structures, if you will, were in place. And not just in level 1, but up in level 4, right?
Yeah.
What would that look like, right? Because things are changing, right? And the district is, and everybody is learning, and we're all learning. So I'm really happy to hear that, Sean. And I just think that the both teams of Inclusive Ed and InEd are so skilled. I would love to see this instead of 2 silos. I would like to see them become a circle and share their incredible knowledge and expertise. It was just my little bubble dream. So there you go.
Yeah. Sorry, can I just make a comment to that? I feel like we did some of that work today up here in this room together. Brief answer, but we are learning from each other and we're building those bridges together.
Okay, Sean and then Megan, and I see Jackie had a hand up, so I'm just, maybe if some of the questions get answered, we can.
Just in support of what was being said in terms of contacting the family, I know in the last 5 years, referrals to school-based team aren't even accepted unless family has been contacted. That's an automatic step.
Oh, yeah.
So.
That's good.
I said invited, not informed.
Okay.
Yeah, I was certainly informed. I wasn't invited. So, but I understand there's difference, just so that it's not misinformation. Thanks.
Maybe just, there is just sometimes it's such a complex situation. I know one family, when I was still working as a counselor at another school, had been invited to school-based team, and it was explained over the phone what that was. But when they walked in and saw the psychologist and the occupational therapist and the teacher and the principal and the counselor, they were absolutely overwhelmed and regretted going to it. So I think we have some work to do around also communicating and educating what school-based team actually can look like, and make sure that parents know when they're attending the meeting what to expect.
We're also looking at formats, and it has to be intimidating for a parent to step in to see 10 educators around a table talking about their, and so we're looking at, is there 1 or 2 people that can represent to be able to share? How do we bridge that so there's a comfort level? And in some cases, like Kevin Cameron showed us, that school isn't necessarily the best place to have that discussion, right? Maybe it's in a totally different environment that there's a comfort level, all right? So.
And it is tricky because the school-based team is a team of usually pretty defined people. And I could do a whole other presentation on school-based team, but there's a defined group of people. And so, for instance, a speech and language pathologist sits at that table. There could be a child that doesn't necessarily have, a parent would never consider a communication being a need, and maybe it's not, but the speech and language pathologist often brings like, whoa, this amazing information, because they just have this different frame of reference, this different knowledge. So we have a team, and sometimes, like Tara alluded to, that presence of that professional, a counselor. Why is there a counselor here? We're talking about math, so sometimes it's not, the best venue for a parent to come to that team meeting, but it means that we need to have a follow-up meeting to talk about some of those great, the expert.
The ideas.
And yeah. Thank you.
As DPAC, we'd love to support our parents in school-based team meetings where appropriate and invited. Can families ask to have their children referred to school-based teams? And what's an appropriate or average timeline to get into a school-based team timeline? That's the I can sort of explain.
It's funny because people talk about that to me all the time, and they say, well, there was a wait list. Like I did just recently say the parent was really concerned, and they said, well, we'll have time in, like, I don't know, mid-June or something. And I was like, this is crazy, right? We have a concern that we have to respond to. So, schools are all different. They have different levels. I mean, some school-based teams are scheduled for months, but that doesn't mean because we have a scheduled school-based team on Wednesday morning at 8:00, we can't also have one on Thursday afternoon at 2:30. So
it's good to hear. I think as parents, we keenly feel our kids, the opportunities slide by, and every moment that it feels like a heartbreak to them.
Yeah.
We feel it.
Yeah.
So it's nice to know that there's accommodations in the timeline.
And so, I mean, and it's funny because I've even schools have said, oh yeah, I didn't really think that wasn't really an actual school-based team because it's not Tuesday morning at 8:00. It can happen at any time. And if a parent requests a meeting, I think that you should be responded to in an appropriate amount of time, which is pretty darn soon from my perspective.
Not to dial down sooner, but do you think like a couple of weeks is an appropriate time?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get myself into trouble here, but I was a teacher for a long time, and if a parent called me and said I had a concern, I'd want to be meeting with them as soon as I could.
It's tough for us because we often get asked as DPAC what's normal, and we don't necessarily know what's normal. And it can be tricky. So knowing what a sort of, I know that with there are so many reasons that systems fluctuate, but that it can be really knowing a best practice for timelines and understanding that not every timeline can be a commitment for every child or student or school. It would be really nice to have a best practice timeline that if it's gotten to this point, then it may need to be escalated. If it's gotten to this point, then it definitely needs to be escalated. Keeping in mind that the communication can sort of come apart for various reasons.
It's also complex because the point of having the SPT doesn't necessarily have to have everyone together at a table to meet the need of what's being asked by that parent, right? And so our expectation is there's communication really quickly to ascertain, okay, what's going on? And sometimes it can be solved through a phone call. Some it can be, pop in, we're gonna have a quick meeting. If we're waiting on just the SPT and that's 2 months in advance, then there's a bunch of opportunities before that have been missed to be able to support the child and the family.
I think we're in a state where we're not even sure of the opportunities that have been missed. We're still we don't even know what to ask for when we're asking the question.
That's fair.
So we don't know, if we ask for a school-based team and we hear it's 2 months out, we don't know that there are other interventions that could be added in and I think sometimes staff feel hesitant to offer them because they're not sure that those resources exist and they don't want to dangle that in front of a parent and have it not be there.
I think bottom line, again, if I were face to face with a parent who was saying, I just don't feel that my child is getting what they need. Again, I just put this slide up. My first question would be, have you communicated your concerns to the teacher? And if you have, and the teacher's saying, I'm doing everything I can't meet your child's needs on my own, then I would suggest the parent request of the teacher, can you have a school-based team in place? Can we have a school-based team? and that the teacher approach and request that, and then follow a process with that. But again, it comes down to that level one. If you're not getting and your child isn't getting what they need from the classroom teacher, then it can go to the school-based team for a greater problem-solving conversation about what supports can be put in place to meet those needs.
That's novel information for us, because I think our natural inclination would have been to go to the principal, which makes it feel disciplinary and feels adversarial for the parent.
And you can definitely, you know, typically an administrator does sit at the table with a school-based team, along with several other professionals. So you can certainly request a school-based team from an administrator, but a classroom teacher is often the ones who put in a referral to school-based team.
I'm glad there are classroom teachers here to lean on and connect with.
Well, and that's something that we might need to address a little bit better in our process, even around school-based team in the work that's happening with the committee that I referenced earlier, is that we talk about, well, what if we have a situation and there's no room on the agenda for a long time? What are our options and how do we communicate that with parents? So thank you for that.
I appreciate all these conversations. They're so great. I'd love to hear your question, Jackie, and then I welcome you guys to just carry on and move forward with your presentation.
Wait till the end of, there's this, not the next slide, the slide after.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, this.
Okay, so our district inclusion support team, how do the referrals happen? Who are they? How do we do this? Our district inclusion, we have district inclusion support teachers, which include, our district counselors. We've already talked about our board certified behavior consultant and our behavior intervention support worker. And when they do go out to the team or to a particular school, when a referral has come in and we've processed that, these are the different things that they do. They can provide strategies for successful inclusion. And we've talked before, I believe, about inclusion not just meaning this child is sitting in the classroom for 5 hours a day with all of the other students. Inclusion is about creating that sense of belonging and making sure that a student has peers and making sure that they feel like they're accessing education at their ability level, pardon me. And so our district inclusion support teachers are a big part of that in creating opportunities for successful inclusion for our students. They do a lot of program planning, which is one of the things I was talking about when we do have a student that's exhibiting some challenging behaviors. That's one of the first questions Tracy and I often ask is, what is their programming like? Is the programming suitable for their needs? And our district inclusion teachers will go in and have a look at that and work on adapting that for the student, creating functional curriculum, making suggestions, providing resources, increasing capacity, as Tracy was talking about, for our site-based or school-based staff, and then putting in place and helping to create positive behavior support plans.
Somebody asked about the referral process. So what typically happens is we have a referral form that is just kind of like, check, we need some district inclusion support. And then we ask for school-based team minutes and then details to the request, like what is going on? What are the concerns? What have you tried? What interventions? We like to see what interventions have been tried. We then have a member of the team reach out to the school and ask some follow-up questions. And then through our meeting that happens periodically, we sort of assign, for lack of a better words, like, okay, you know, this inclusion teacher is going to go out maybe with the behavior intervention and get a little bit more information and start the process.
And that's where we make a decision about whether or not our behavior consultant would be appropriate in that situation. Usually we'll have the inclusion support teachers going out, as I mentioned, doing some programming, putting some plans in place, supporting the school, and they might come back to our table. We meet every second Monday morning, and so they might come back to our table and say, we really need our behavior consultant to gather some data for us so we can get a better handle on what's going on here, and that needs to fuel our ideas around our planning. So that's how our behavior support behavior consultant is accessed. And then we review it again and again and again. So we come back to the table, we share information, we ask, how's that going with that student over at such and such a school? And sometimes we need to have meetings where we collaborate and do some problem solving together, even with our team, to come up with creative strategies for supporting kids who are having a challenging time with whatever's going on for them. We do also have district programming. We have Bridges, which is an alternate site for currently primary students with behavior resource services. That's located at Rob Road Elementary School. We have a swim program. That's a weekly program for elementary and secondary students, our challenge program. Secondary prep program is currently at Vanier. We have a link transition program, which is between Vanier and North Island College. Our life skills program is at Isfeld, and our middle years life skills program is at Lake Trail.
Our link transition program is not currently running this year. This is something that we run based on numbers. It's a additional year of schooling for some of our most vulnerable kiddos. So for those of you who don't know, our K-12 system is from 5 to 18, and then adult services starts for kids at 19. So that often leaves families and youth a gap. So we don't like that gap. It's not good for kids and it's not good for families. So we offer an additional year of programming, and for some of those kids, it means we've been able to have a beautiful partnership with North Island College, which is also fairly unique to our district, where we support them in the North Island College classes and combine that the North Island College experience with sort of life skills and independent living. We work with our STAD coordinators through CLBC too, a little bit to, work on things like ensuring that they get their persons with disability set up, funding set up. They're even as simple as there's some of these kids don't have a SIN card and their bank cards, often putting them in supported employment opportunities. And we've had more kids in this gap year, in this year, have opportunities that have led to not full-time, but paid employment. And I can even count, like, it's so exciting where we've just been able to really focus on these kiddos, giving them those independent skills outside of our traditional brick and mortar secondary school. So it's pretty exciting stuff.
I do fear that if I let any questions pop up more at this time, we might not get the material. So I'm going to encourage you to keep going, and then maybe people can just hold their questions. They might get answered. And so you see where we are at the end.
So I'll just speak briefly about our provincial outreach programs, moving beyond just our district level services. There are a number of programs that the province provides to help meet educational needs of low incidence students throughout British Columbia. And we've got them listed there. You've probably heard of POPARD, which is the Provincial Outreach Program for Autism-Related Disorders. There's also a program for deaf and hard of hearing, for the visually impaired, POPFAST, which is the Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder Outreach Program, Inclusion Outreach, and then SET-BC and ARC-BC. And each provincial outreach program has a partner with Inclusive Ed, who is the liaison between that outreach program and our school district. And oftentimes we have, for example, members of POPARD coming into our community and our school district to support some of our children. So valuable resources that we tap into quite frequently.
As I'm sure you can recognize, many students require wraparound services, and we need to work with our community partners in many instances. Our community partners include, but are not limited to, the folks that you see up on this screen. Transitions are really important for kids with support needs. So we work really closely with the Child Development Association for kids that are coming into kindergarten that have received supports prior to being school age. And we also, of course, then work with STAD and CLBC for kids that are transitioning out of our school system. So not, but again, then, we're in K to 12, and throughout K to 12, we need to access some of these services. We have really, really great working relationships with CYSN and CYMH. I think, I don't think that that is always as typical in other school districts. I do feel like we're pretty lucky with those relationships, and we're always, at the other end of a phone call and I think they would say the same.
I'll also add the work that we do with CYMH and the Foundry through our ICY program in the district has really established our relationships working with those organizations. And then we also, particularly with counselors and youth and family workers, refer to many of our community partners for extra support in terms of kids or families receiving therapy, or working with victim services, working with transition, working with the sexual abuse intervention program. So we have very close working relationships with many organizations in the community like that.
Mm-hmm. Some that we're working directly with and some that we're referring to.
So we also work directly with families proactively. We are absolutely bringing families involved to work with students' IEPs, creating IEPs for transition planning between schools, between levels of faith, whenever there's challenges. And again, we can't, as this slide shows, we can't keep the child at the center without the family being a big part of it. As Tracy mentioned, families are the experts. I often say that to families. There's no way I'm going to get to know your child as well as you know your child. So we have to tap into that knowledge to be effective, for sure.
One of the things too, we get a lot of phone calls from families, and often, and I'll get a phone call from a parent, and then I often will touch base with the school and say, oh, well, what's going on? I've been hearing from this parent, and I'm often hearing from parents, or even when I'm listening to or I hear from schools, or even when I'm listening to the parent, sometimes it feels and seems like anger, and sometimes the schools are misinterpreting what could be fear or anxiety for their child, a vulnerability, as sort of anger or as a demand, right? And one of the things that I feel very strongly about is our ability in inclusive ed to sort of like step back and go, hey, what's really going on? What's really going on? And remembering that the kids that we've got, the kids that we're working with, and the families that we're supporting, there's an incredible vulnerability there, and sometimes even a grief, right? We might have a parent that's dealing with a diagnosis that's hard. And when we've got grief, or when we've got hard, or we're still trying to figure it out for ourselves and what that means for our child, and then we have to be careful, right? We as the educators, we as the keepers of, and reassuring. And I think that it's super important, and something that I feel like we will continue to do that work with schools, like just making sure that they're recognizing that so it sounds like a demand, but you know what? I think it's really what we're hearing is somebody saying, I'm worried about my kid and I need some help. And that's our role, right? We need to figure that out for the parent.
One thing I've been saying to Tracy a lot lately is I've grown to dislike the word advocacy. And having a parent calling and saying, I need to advocate for my child, or my doctor told me to call Inclusive Ed and advocate for my child. I don't want people to feel like they have to fight to get their child the supports that they need to be successful. And advocacy in my brain has turned into that word. I'm happy to have them call and say, my child is struggling. Okay, let's figure something out so that they're not struggling. And that doesn't have to be with anger or that fierce advocacy. It's a right of every child to get what they need at school.
And I think hearing all the questions tonight, I just want to, I think that it's important that we're offering information sessions for parents right now, planning a DPAC presentation for September on IEPs. And I'm actually got myself a little bit excited about it and thinking that it could maybe be the first of an information session. Like I think about this group here, you guys have so much knowledge, you know, and you still have a lot of questions, right? So I think that it's an important message for us to move forward with, for sure. Just, is that, oh yeah, just quickly. So again, trying to get through here, but I mean, it's a big department. We do a lot of stuff, as well as providing guidance for all of inclusive ed roles and responsibility. We also support even the creation and work around these things. We, school-based team, positive behavior support plans, employee risk reduction plans, suicide protocols, critical incident response team, gender-based violence, threat assessments, accessibility committee. We're involved in all of those things and work to guide our processes to develop forms, standard practices around the district.
And this is pretty much it. So to wrap it up, we're pretty proud actually of some of the initiatives that we've put in place, and we've had a chance to share some of our projects with Island Case, who are sort of tapping into some of our ideas, which is absolutely great. We do have, as Sean already mentioned, our primary years mental health collaborative, in which we get to work with Dr. Carol Coxon, who is a retired psychiatrist and is super passionate about early intervention for mental health with children. And so that team, which I'm super fortunate to be able to sit on, meets with Dr. Coxon once a month, and she will actually do intake. Our counselors bring forward teams working closely with parents, and she will go into the schools, do observations, meet with the parents, and whether it's making a referral for an autism assessment or medication or further exploration around mental health difficulties, she's working really closely with our school district in her retirement. So we're so pleased that she's been able to access funding for that through Island Health. We also work closely with CYMH. They sit at that table as well, Child and Youth Mental Health. We have Mawini House, which is in front of Marcusfeld, that our life skills program often uses, our snack chat program, which is a communication program that happens at the pool, where lots of kids with their communication devices come and they have an outing at the pool, and then they get to practice skills that our SLPs are putting into place and our inclusion teachers are supporting. We have a friendship group run by one of our inclusion teachers, Bridges, which is our behavior program at Rob Road. We also have lots of social emotional learning happening using that, as Tracy referenced earlier, multi-tiered system of support. And then our current focuses are around functional curriculum and our low arousal approach. A lot of you have probably heard of CPI, which is our nonviolent crisis intervention program. And we have 2 of our staff members with Inclusive Ed in Surrey right now, finalizing their training around low arousal, which is a program we're bringing into this district, which is, again, a nonviolent supportive program for supporting students while they're in distress. And one thing that is not in place, but we're super excited that's coming soon, is what we're calling an in-residence district support model, which we're piloting soon, where some of our inclusion team is actually going and spending more than just a meeting or an observation in a school, rather coming up with plans and really spending a week or 2 or 3 weeks, possibly even more, in those schools implementing their programs and planning that they're putting in place, so they can model it to the staff and teach them how to do it as well. We're excited about that coming up.
Looking at it as a way to continue to build capacity, to look at if we can do more in that area. Kind of coming from some of the work that we've done around functional curriculum. We have lots of schools with kids, but we had one particular school with a number of students all around the same age that were requiring sort of functional curriculum. So curriculum that looks quite different from their same age peers. And so we had a team go in there and do some really intensive work. And we found what we were able to do was then step back, and we had a group of people at that school who could continue this work independently of our team. So they're like, yeah, that's what we want. So look at how we can do that. to that more, but it's still in its infancy, I would say. For more information, feel free to look at our inclusion and diversity area on Learn 71. You're going to see lots of great things there. There's a little website information under programs and services that requires an update, but I think that we're updating a lot of things right there right now. So, but also if you are interested in hearing more about anything you've heard tonight, certainly let any one of us know. We'd be happy to do so. Often other topics of interest for inclusive education or how designations and funding work. What about individual education plans, just the roles and responsibilities, school-based team, or any of the other things that you'd be interested in hearing about. We're happy to share.
And we really appreciate all the questions.
Yes.
Sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And it's nice to hear the gaps show up a little bit stronger with parents and, you know, with others who are asking the questions. So from here, if there are further questions and there's no time, feel free to send them to one of us, okay? And we'll get answers or meet, you know, like we're doing with the DPAC coming up and some things like that.
Yeah, and you can email any of us directly, and you know how to do that. And or there's a general email for inclusive education too.
I do have two people waiting to ask questions. What I might just really quickly do is ask one of my colleagues to make a quick motion to just extend this meeting. We do have the policy work still to be completed. And then have the questions answered and I can say goodbye to our guests and move on to the next item. Would that be okay? Michelle?
So I'd like to move that we extend our meeting tonight by up to 30 minutes.
Great. Can I have a seconder? All in favor? Shannon, seconder. Thank you. And I believe it was Sean and then Megan for questions. Do you have a question? Oh, I did all in favor, I think. Did I do all in favor?
You did, yeah.
Okay.
For Jackie.
Jackie and then Megan.
Yeah, thank you for being here and for your presentation. And I'm glad to hear talk about sessions for DPAC and about acknowledging gaps in communication and clarity around structure and how it works. And I hope that's brought to schools because our members on a large scale have just stated that they don't really know who they contact in Inclusive Ed. They don't know, they wouldn't know your face to recognize you. And so to have that one, like not all of you, but a majority wouldn't know if you came into the classroom. And so to have that face-to-face, to have the clarity of who to talk to in the processes, I think there's a lot of room for growth around communication of process and around that interaction and being in schools and witnessing what is happening on the ground level. So I'm happy to hear that that's something that will be increased moving forward. It's desperately needed. Thinking of our schools in which behavior is increasing, violent incidences is increasing, student on student and student to staff. And we know that behaviors are an indication that needs aren't being met, which tells us that the current model isn't working for a large number or for a number of our students. And what that means is many students are outside of the classroom for a large portion of the day, one-on-one. We're seeing admin, LSDs, counselors, ISWs, and others pulled to be one-on-one with students, which means that supports for those other students in classrooms who need social, emotional, and academic support aren't getting them because of that one-on-one need. We're noticing classrooms that are going through regular evacuations, and it's kind of becoming normalized, which has an impact on those who have already experienced trauma, as well as those who are experiencing trauma through it. So my question is, I hear some new approaches with that collaborative lens of working with the school and the teacher. What are some of the innovative programs or approaches that are trying to meet the needs of these students that don't function within this traditional model, besides asking teachers what tools are used, for instance, like UDL design for like universal design for learning tools, because the tools aren't meeting the needs. So what are some new approaches that we're taking for those students, adaptive approaches? And given that many students are facing disruptions to learning, what are some approaches that we are putting in place to ensure that all students have opportunity to learn in a stable and supportive environment?
I'll let Tracy answer the question, but I do want to point out that if the belief is that Inclusive Ed's had some magic wand and we just come in and fix it all, then it's a lack of recognition that this is all of our responsibility to work collectively with kids. It's teachers, it's QP, it's parents, it's staff, to be able to walk that path together. Because as you said, the student of today, in some cases, is quite different than the student of 10 years ago. Which is why there are many things from the Inclusive Ed perspective, such as having, a behavior consultant who has expertise in a certain area to be able to provide a lens that we might not have seen before. It's by creating and training our own staff in things like low arousal, which is a totally different method of being able to support children by recognizing before an incident occurs what we as adults can do differently to mitigate that situation happening, right? But we're also open to ideas from teachers, from CUPE, from others, to be able to collectively kind of work on this problem. I didn't want to.
No, it's a really good question, but it's a huge question. But it's something that we all need to be thinking about, and we are thinking about all the time. To be honest, it's something that keeps me up at night at times. One of the things that I feel that we're, you talk about what supporting one-on-one, there's a lot of concerns there. First of all, it's putting a child in we're isolating that child. We're not necessarily, in that case, providing them with the opportunities to learn the skills that they need to have. But again, it's about how do we look at it collectively? How do we look at our systems as a whole? And we're working within we're working within a structure that was designed a long time ago. So we need to be looking at redesigning some of our structures and feeling comfortable with letting go of some of those structures. Right? Why do we need to have a bell at 10:15 right now when I'm just getting involved in something, where I've just got these kids settled into something deep and meaningful? There's certain things like that I can't change and we can't change, and, as individuals that we can't change. But that being said, there's little pockets of hope all over the place. And we have people, 2 years ago, I remember trying to convince somebody that we could bring a group of children together that had similar support needs and use less adult support if we altered the environment and brought these kids together. And it was no, no, no. And one of those same people that were saying no, 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 just presented at a learning support teacher meeting and said, I don't know how I did it before. How did I not bring these kids together? And look at the growth I'm seeing. So it's happening in pockets. I get permission, and this is kind of an aside, but we have to empower our staff to think outside the box, right? And not just our learning support teacher and not just Inclusive Ed, but everybody. Well, if this isn't working, what could we try? And I think that we need to be encouraging that, and we need to be brave in some of what we're trying.
I think just to add to that, when I started teaching, I remember my first year having one student in my class, one, who later got a diagnosis of ADHD. And I was 22 years old and going, what do I do with this student in a small community where there was no such thing as the Inclusive Ed department? It was do or die, figure it out for yourself and make that kid successful. And now we do have permission to think outside the box. And it's not about, you better make sure that kid can multiply by Christmas time. There is more flexibility, and we are putting more emphasis on belonging and recognizing who students are as individuals. And Tracy and I do try to get to the schools. One example is one of our programs, our Bridges program. Every day, for some reason, these kids had figured out that they wanted to run away. And so our staff was in the neighborhoods looking for them and running after them. And I started going there every day and going, we have to make this program something they're going to run to instead of something they're going to run from. And it was every day showing up at that program and changing what the classroom looked like and making it cozy and making it warm and making it a place that they wanted to be. And they felt like they belonged before we could even talk about curriculum or about learning or about reading skills. So that doesn't always address it, but I would agree with you. Behavior is communication. And when kids are acting out and some of those extreme behaviors, they're telling us something isn't right. And what that tells us isn't turn to page 42, not that you're suggesting that. It tells us we need to get in and figure out what's going on for that student so we can change their programming. And in that case, it was about putting up warm Christmas lights around the classroom. We went and bought beanbag chairs for these kids. We got rid of, the timeout chair, the timeout desk. We tried to really make a shift so that it was a place that they walked in and went, yeah, I belong here. And they haven't run away since. Do we still have behaviors? Yes, we're chipping away at them. But it's trying to solve those problems and address them one at a time. And it's different for every child, of course.
I also too want to and I guess it's reassuring. It's sometimes not reassuring, it's sometimes it's like, oh man, because it's not isolated to Comox Valley School District. And sometimes it feels like it can be. And then we go to a meeting. We have a group called CASE in the province, right? It's a Council of Administrators of Inclusive Special Educators, administrators of, anyway, you know what I mean. It's in there. They changed the acronym a while back. And so we have an island group, and then we meet periodically, and not very often in person, maybe a couple times a year in person, and then some teams. Our last session in person, which is incredibly valuable time for this group. It's, we're all doing the same work. It's all very passionate work, and people, it's an amazing team. The last meeting we had, the entire meeting was dedicated to this topic. What are we doing? How do we better meet the needs of these kids and what we're seeing? So
specifically with behavior challenges.
Yeah. The classroom clearing kids, the evacuation, right? And so it's an ongoing process, and it's one step at a time. And I don't think, in education, I remember years ago, even as a classroom teacher, my husband or my family member or somebody would say, are you all done? And I'd be, done. It doesn't work that way in education as a teacher. We're never done, right? We just keep moving. We just keep moving forward.
Thank you very much. And you had a question also, Megan?
I'm concerned that it will run too long, so perhaps we'll maybe get some question. Well, and thank you for your question. That was one that was close to the heart of many parents, and it was really lovely to hear it, although tough subject matter. So feel free to not finish this question and save it for the DPEC session that's coming up. But you said that parents are the experts on their child, but when there's a disagreement about what's best for the child between the staff and the parents, how do you resolve that? And I feel like I would have loved to have emailed this question, but with the three of you here, it's so nice to have a trifecta perspective. So.
Well, I find that in most cases, a conversation with a parent and the school, like I find that I'm often in those conversations, Megan. I feel that that's sort of my role, is sometimes to try to find that agreement between the school and the parent. And it's about really listening, and ultimately then. But I guess I don't know, because I'm like, well, then I can just tell the school to do it. No, that's not my, but it really is about listening and ensuring those respectful relationships. And if there is a disagreement and the parent hasn't been able to get to where they think it's important for them to go with the school, then they do need to talk, talk to the principal, and then ultimately one of us, and we can help support the process.
I think for us too, it's recognizing that, Tracy mentioned grief. A lot of parents who come to us with anger, really underneath that is a lot of grief and feeling not heard. Mm-hmm. And that's where the louder voices typically come in. And I think having the opportunity, Tracy and I spend a lot of time on the phone, spend a lot of time meeting with parents. I think as I'm sure you do as well, Sean, but I think just giving parents that chance to tell their story and get down to what is it that you need to make this okay? And then honestly looking at it and going, can we provide it? And does it make sense for that child? And I think when there is a disagreement between a school and a parent, it takes that objective listening ear to sort of shift the dynamics of that a little bit and look at it again with that one slide we had up with the child in the middle. Okay, sometimes we have to give up what we want, but what is in the best interest of that child? And that's what Tracy and I always try to focus on is I want to hear you out. I want to hear your story. I want to get to know your child. And how can we move forward in the best interest of your child? And it can be complex, very complex sometimes.
And given that we are a system that does have limited, there are limitations to certain things. And I always err on the side of this is what we can do rather than focusing on this is what we can't do, right? Hopefully we get to a place of a common understanding.
Thank you for your thoughtful response.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I think there's one,
Sean, yeah.
did I skip you? Okay, my apologies. Sean and then Jen, and then we'll wrap it up and thank you guys so much.
A bit of a different slant. Another one of your areas is gifted students. And you didn't mention it directly. You said the challenge program, but didn't explain it. I know that's for gifted students. My question is, why don't the IEPs that those students receive as part of the challenge program follow them into high school? And what's being offered in terms of for gifted students beyond the challenge program?
Okay, two parts. High school, secondary? Or did you mean was your second part of the question specific to secondary as well?
So that's what's happening, because the challenge program's there for elementary students, but then what's
happening in secondary? If we have a true diagnosis of a gifted learner, then we certainly can continue to support them with a gifted IEP. It's not necessarily we have children in the district that have designation as gifted in secondary. We don't have any specific programming for gifted learners in high schools for a couple of reasons. One of which being our curriculum, our redesigned curriculum, our BC curriculum allows for a lot of flexibility of how we can design our learners' experience. So we're expecting that to happen at the school level. If there is an IEP, they would still have a learning support teacher, case manager who would be helping to guide that. At any point in time, we can have our district teacher involved in consulting on a student's programming in high school. And the other and final piece I would probably add to that is at secondary schools, there's a lot more program choice. So that allows that just flexibility in programming options for the child. And I guess I said that was finally, but I have to add one more point. One of the other things that we find that's really important for our gifted learners is to have a sense of community, and that opportunity is greater in secondary schools because our secondary schools are just so much bigger. So kids who might feel, and we find that with all of our diverse learners, it's not just gifted, but even our children with autism, for instance, or, once they find their community, right? And sometimes that's easier to do at secondary school.
Jen?
Sorry, thank you. We had a parent submission question. They sent it to the public one, but I don't know if we got that, so I just want to follow up. They have a question around technology support, mainly in elementary education. They are wondering why we don't prioritize keeping the same EA from K to 3 at a minimum, where technology or adaptive equipment is used. It often takes a teacher until at least Christmas break to learn a student's technology needs or adaptive equipment, and often the EA is them learning alongside them. This often creates a gap or delays in learning when everyone is trying to figure these things out. So it would be helpful whenever possible to keep the same EA and have that one hurdle already crossed come September. And as this parent is a parent of a child using adaptive technology, it's stressful worrying about it every September. So I'm just curious.
We do. It is a great question, and we do definitely prioritize that. It's not always possible due to contractual reasons, union reasons, or, I've had sometimes where an EA has actually applied out a position and said, don't tell the parent. So we do absolutely, because it's a Best case scenario, especially kids who are using communication and a familiar communication partner, we want to keep that pairing for as long as appropriate. It's a drain on the whole system when that EA changes, so we definitely prioritize that. But we do have parents that are concerned. I have one parent who every year for 6 years has called me every spring and saying, we just have this conversation and she wants me to know how important it is. And there has been a change of an EA and things like that, but we've gotten through it, and that the priority is somebody who is familiar with communication technology, or that we're prioritizing that training and stuff. So we definitely want to be responsive to that. And if ever that happened for not a good reason, then we would definitely want to be looking into that.
And that applies for our students with diabetes and students with seizure disorders. When we get Nursing Support Services, who's one of our community partners, in to train our EAs and our teachers with how to deal with those complex issues, wherever we possibly can, we prefer to keep the same EA. If it's working, we prefer to, but as Tracy mentioned, sometimes there's extreme circumstances that don't allow us to do that, but it is our preference.
Thanks for keeping track of the online question, Jen. And Tracy, Tara, and Sean, thank you so much for your presentation. So awesome to have so many questions answered and some more intimate conversations than we might necessarily have in some other setups. So I really, really appreciate your time and your willingness to just be open with us today and sharing all this information. And just thanks so much for coming tonight. Great.
For having us.
Yeah.
Here.
We do have another item on our agenda, so I'm gonna find it through all this awesome information.
We can go out that way or that way.
Yeah. The next item is our policy, under policy, and it's our draft policy 1. So I'll just turn it over to the superintendent to have a quick speech on it.
Yeah, great, thanks. This is just a brief, there's a briefing note in the package, page 18, 19, and I believe 20. It is a briefing note that talks a little bit about the work that's been done on policy 1 and why it's here tonight. This is a briefing note that was prepared by staff, but is reflective of the conversation that's been had at the ad hoc policy committee, which is Trustee McKenna-O'Keefe, Trustee Loser, and Chair Waite, who are working with staff around some policy revisions and reviews. So this is a major one. Policy 1, referred to as foundational statements, and it's being brought here tonight because it's been changed significantly. The intention is this policy is to reflect the new direction within the strategic plan and to embody the board's values with a special emphasis on embedding Indigenous ways of knowing and being. So because this is a foundational policy, it's a little different than the traditional trajectory policy revision that's handled through the ad hoc policy committee. It typically comes to a public board meeting for the board to consider and potentially pass a motion to approve a new policy. It's brought specifically here because of the board's interest in ensuring that the board gets this as right as possible and wants to solicit partner feedback. So the intention tonight of bringing it is to have an opportunity to review it, to provide an opportunity for an open and meaningful discussion here that hopefully brings forward any insights and feedback that you may have, and certainly interested in the diverse perspectives that the committee of the whole can bring. And the intention is to then enhance, if required, the board's policy, to ensure that there's clarity, inclusivity, and deep alignment with the strategic plan. So the intention tonight would be to record any feedback that would shape direction, have it go back to the ad hoc policy committee, and then to be brought forward at the earliest possible public board meeting for board consideration, dialogue, and potentially a motion for approval. So I'll turn it over to members of the ad hoc policy committee to hear and facilitate that feedback conversation, but we're hopeful tonight to hear any thoughts and perspectives on such an important policy. And I think if we think about sort of that foundation, we really want to get this right because everything else is built upon it.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. We are grateful to be sitting here together to have extended time a little bit to offer some open conversation through our Vice Chair Hal, just to be able to hear some perspectives on what we're hoping is a very tangible foundational policy. And what I mean by that is our prior policy, our current policy, is extensive and lengthy, and I think was challenging to see it as something that we were able to day reflect on in our work as we make every decision in our district. So the hope is that we're able to bring in any feedback, any thoughts as we make this as fulsome and living and breathing as it can be for the work that we're doing. It already has a lot of strategic plan elements, of course, but if there are any points that you wish to raise, this is a chance to do so before we bring it to the board for approval. And if you're happy to sort of share as people share their thoughts, we'll make sure they're captured and bring it back to our policy committee. Thanks.
Maybe just to give anybody a minute, I'm not just see any trustees in particular had anything, but yeah, thank you. Trustee Leslie?
I love it. There's one paragraph that I've been trying to think of another word to say this, and it's really hard, but maybe with all of our minds at the table, we might be able to come up with it. In our shared history, Indigenous peoples first were asked to assimilate. And what does that look like? And then we were integrating, and still are. And so those words and terms have a connotation to them that somehow leave us feeling with a feeling of not belonging. Because if I have to integrate who I am and my way of being, then I don't belong.
And just for clarity, we're looking at page 22 of the package,
Right.
page 2 of the
I'm getting there.
policy, just in the top paragraph, the
Yeah.
last sentence,
The last,
I think is what you're referring to. Am I?
yeah.
I don't want to make a mistake.
So in alignment with our values, the last sentence in the paragraph, in alignment with our values and strategic plan, we strive to center as fabulous Indigenous perspectives and knowledge throughout our practices by. So just release that word, integrate.
And I just was, did you want to make a comment?
Embrace.
I love that. We do use embed twice before, but I don't
Yeah.
center.
Yeah.
I just meant if we were using embedding before, it would make sense to use it here rather than integrate, but
So that was Jeremy.
Sean, did you have your hand up?
I'm just going to suggest embrace.
No, embrace. Ola, I mean, I'm happy to just.
I think center is
Centers pointed, embracing, everyone can embrace it in a different way, but centering focuses it. Just an idea.
center or embrace.
Yes, yeah. Beautiful. Thank you.
Also just pretend it's inclusive ed questions and we'll get lots of feedback.
Maybe some more time. First question asked.
Oh, I do
Settle
feel like,
down.
that everyone, had this beforehand, so it's probably a positive reflection of the work.
It is a good news.
I agree.
I'll let Jen ask her question.
Well, it's not even a question, it's just nitpicky. Page 1/21. Under the our purpose is to create, kind of midway under the vision, purpose, creation. I don't know that create should be capitalized. But that's a real nitpicky thing.
Yeah, no, that's great. Just here, capital C.
Oh, yeah.
It takes a minute.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She can be very
Well
bad.
done.
It's because they're actually create, I need to find it by all means. I was just going to share one thing that might be nice to hear at the table as well. that there's been a lot of recent discussions with the ad hoc policy committee around, you know, of course, look at other districts and their work, but also just the actual, like, look at our current policy and all our current policies and the restructure as we go forward. And that's just early stages conversations, but we also talked about, you know, how it looks, how we look at a document, how we see it, what we look to first, like, you know, so the actual formatting and structure is something that I think is just ongoing conversations too. So nice to share.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. John, Jackie, Janet.
I just have a curiosity about the territorial acknowledgement. This acknowledgement is a bit different than what is often used
Yeah.
in the district, so I'm wondering why it is different than what we have had brought forward to many meetings, and even in terms of what we use for our meetings as a CDD.
I'll just respond in short, Sean, that right now that's the territorial acknowledgement that's been approved by Chief and Council to use in official documentation and official territorial acknowledgements.
It's a bit different from
It's-
from our welcoming. The second sentence is slightly different. It says, we are thankful for the privilege, but we would like to thank them for the privilege of living on their land.
Yeah.
Whereas we're like, we're thankful
It should
for the
be the
privilege of living.
exact same. Yeah.
Good job. I've noted an inconsistency.
Yes.
Good eye, though.
Is that what you were noting, or were you mentioning the?
No, it's different. Like
The absence of the mention of the Aiks and the
Yes.
Penlatch Aiks and Sasila, which we've heard from our knowledge keeper, the importance of recognizing all people on the land, and this doesn't do that.
So there was a request at this time, while we're still working through some of those pieces, to retain the officially approved from Chief and Council. I had a conversation, I had the opportunity to have a conversation with Council earlier this year.
Wait, sorry, just acknowledging that this is still evolving language. We're learning all the time, and this is where we are now, humbly.
I was just curious. I mean, it's different than what.
Yeah, thank you for that.
In speaking of the formatting, perhaps a suggestion would be something that we're doing with our documents is like using spacing and font that is supportive to people with learning disabilities or differing learning abilities so that it's easier to read. So fonts like Aptos can be really helpful to make it more accessible.
Thank you.
That's super fun.
Yeah. God, this is a brilliant table.
It's a really good.
This is like a really good table. I would just.
Getting more and more humbled at the.
Go ahead, John.
I just wanted to say, just being part of the strategic plan stuff, like work, I feel like this really represents a lot of the conversations that were happening out there. Like this is a really, yeah, like I just do not see any edits, which is impressive because normally we have lots. Good work has been had here. Well done to the people that were sitting around the table doing this work. It's well done.
Here, here.
I'm going to build on what Chelsea said, is that, you know, the ad hoc policy committee is like, it was like, where do we start? And do we have to have everything perfect to start, and can we go back? And we struggled with even things like, does this section even, is it even numbered? Right, and then the bigger piece of some other pieces that needed to be added to our policy package to make it what it needs to be and how that looks, but we had to start somewhere. And this is where the committee started. And so it will be interesting when we get to the point of the board decisions, is that what will it all eventually evolve to? with font being an amazing example of that as well. And so that I think these are all living documents, and we'll have to find a way to navigate that way to keep them, some of the policy as living document, knowing that it will be evolving, and the complexity of through policy change, how it seems to take a long time, and then how to make it more nimble for some policies like this one. That's kind of my feelings from sitting and working through this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think this is pretty nimble. To just, so I would be celebrating your work, that this reads well. It flows. It goes from the vision statements, all of your statements, into what that looks like and feels like. And then goes into explaining what learning is going to look like, right? And who's accountable. So if you just, I congratulate you.
Process that, if I may jump in, that as we all look at everything, I think the amount of every meeting you have, the new things that sort of rise up and then your eyes catch, and as Michelle said, like this sort of starting it and just allowing yourself to immerse yourself in that we're at the foundations of what will just continue to grow and evolve, and even the slightest things, like we looked at the amount of times that the term fellow was used, and that we use in our language, speaking of our fellow trustees, like often like my colleagues, like the little things that seem to come up, and then you go, oh, why wouldn't we dive into, new language, more language that works better for everyone. So it's great. It's really nice to hear some other perspectives.
Go ahead, Christine.
Yeah, I just wanted to say how much I absolutely love the fact that you took 3 pages of, very clinical looking material and turned it into, and numbered, and turned it into a 2-page document that, feels lovely to read. It doesn't feel like it's work to read it. And I hope that community feels the same, and that it's not so overwhelming. Like when even just opening these pages, like it feels like, oh, there's so many numbers and very clinical. And so I really love the real human touch to it, That's
a big part.
Yeah, no, well done.
I really appreciate the lack of numbers as well. I'll share a brief story to that. The BCTF at AGM, we have our guiding principles that we pass each year, and they're always numbered. And they make the statement of there's no order. We made an alteration to those. That statement. We made sure that what we added, we put as number 1, because as soon as you put numbers in, there's an automatic ranking. And so by not having the numbers here, you don't have that ranking. So I very much appreciate that. Maybe the BCTF will eventually learn from that. Maybe they're pretty longstanding.
That way there's problematic in our current policy handbook, and that's where like the urgency to get on that work and bring some of those items from policy, whichever, into foundational policy. 17 specifically.
Yeah, just very quickly, we were trying to really lessen the institutionality of it and the top-down approach of it, and part of that was using the numbers. And another small point I see is we still have a shall. We've talked about consistently using one will do something, not one shall do something. It's just a little friendlier.
2 minutes that we have left, I might just get superintendent to give us some.
Well, I
closing
just
remarks here.
I don't know if these are, it's dangerous to give me closing remarks, but thank you. I do want to just say that I believe, again, I'm really appreciative of trustees demonstrating the direction that we are intending to go, which is to move away. And I listened to, our friends answering questions tonight. around inclusive, and I think of the question even around what happens if we have a disagreement? Well, what happens if you experience humility and relationship? I bet you it's not going to be a binary. I bet you we're going to come together and come to an agreement that's shared. There's a shared understanding that's implicit when we have a different responsiveness within the system. I think that the example of even taking, and I know I'm not the first to get really excited about policy. I believe in the importance of policy. I don't love the revision and the needling and those pieces. But what I appreciate is that the foundational policy and the changes within, I think, also are reflective of the intention of where we want to go collectively. And so I think as we denumber, as we humanize, but by the way, there's less, but it's more. It's actually higher standards versus prescriptive ones. And I think when we hear, I think in response, Jackie, to the concern even around, we have a systemic issue. Like we all are inclusive ed. We all need to be part of the transformation to make the system sustainable. And so I appreciate, trustees on policy one saying, let's try and do business in a different way. Because doing business the same way we've always done business is going to continue to underserve and move us further away from the needs. So I'm not saying that we don't need to continue, like it might need more revision, but I just appreciate moving away from some of that bureaucratic sort of unfeeling into the space that we need to be to move forward collectively. So, and I appreciate all the feedback. I mean, it's interesting, like literally partners make us better. I'm so grateful for that input. And those questions tonight will make us better because they indicate areas that are gaps. So thank you.
It is 9 o'clock. So I just want to quickly, I think we can probably just have casual conversation after. I just wanted to really, like, from my heart, say thank you so much for showing up to this committee of the whole meeting. I was just so happy to see everybody and the way we were communicating and the way everyone was engaged and the feeling that I have right now. I hope it's the same feeling that all of our guests have here, and look forward to future meetings with everybody. And I'm just so happy that we could have all got together tonight and spent the time talking about more ways to support our kids and better ways to be better. I might just ask for a technical motion to adjourn, given the time. Thank you, Michelle, and a seconder. All in favor? Susan, seconder.